So, Deuteronomy. We've reached the end of Hebrews. Why move on to Deuteronomy? Well, any of you who've been following these little talks when we've been going through Acts, through 1 and 2 Kings, Amos, Hosea, Hebrews, you'll have noticed that I quote from Deuteronomy a lot. So I wanted to know more about it. It's not a book I've really ever studied in detail. So I want to know more about what it actually says, and can a book of the Bible, written thousands of years ago, have much to say to us today? Now, we'll find out more about the context in which Deuteronomy takes place in our next session. But briefly, Moses, the people of Israel, are in the land of Moab. They're about to cross the Jordan and take possession of the land that God has promised them. So we've been through Exodus. They wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Moses is about to die. And Deuteronomy is made up of his last 3 sermons. So what does Moses say to them? Well, first of all, chapter 1 through to the end of chapter 4, he reminds them of their past. He covers the journey from Sinai to this second time they're about to enter Canaan. Then from verse 44 of chapter 4 through to chapter 26, this massive section is a look at the 10 Commandments, and he does it, he speaks with force, with clarity. And so Moses is telling them, obey God's laws. And we'll be dealing with a session on each of the commandments and trying to figure out how they apply to us today. Third section is chapters 27 to 31 of Deuteronomy, and that's the blessings and curses of the covenant. And basically Moses is telling them to choose life and increase their faith in God. Now, covenant. Again, we've referred to it quite a few times, particularly in Kings, in Amos, Hosea, Hebrews. And the covenant is an agreement between God and man. It starts in Genesis chapter 15 with a God who loves to make and keep promises. We read in Genesis that God is a shield. He is Abraham's great reward. He promised Abraham a son. He promises him a gift of land. So God makes these promises and he will keep them. Then man, on his behalf, we read in Exodus, has to make sacrifices. Those sacrifices being a propitiation and a substitution for sin. Exodus chapter 12. And remember some of the things we thought about in Hebrews. And they're to adopt a certain lifestyle. And that's what Deuteronomy is going to be telling us about, the lifestyle. Then the final section of Deuteronomy is chapters 32 and to 34. And that's really a final look at Moses as he encourages them under the leadership of Joshua to conquer the land. That land is the promised land which God had promised to Abraham 600 years earlier. And so Deuteronomy is going to be making it clear God keeps his promises, and it's also going to be making it clear that the people of God must obey God's law. Why? Because of all that God has done in the past. Secondly, because of who God is. And thirdly, because of those promises and warnings of God. So okay, that might sum up these sermons, the book of Deuteronomy. But these sermons were delivered to people thousands of years ago. What about us? Well, the first thing to note is they were written down. And they were written down so we could read them. And so find God speaking to us. Now, we are not a nation like Israel, but a church. We are descendants, though, of Abraham by faith. So this book we're going to be looking at applies to us, the people of God, the church. But yes, we need to think carefully about how to apply the laws of Deuteronomy to our situation. Very different. And we must read them in the light of Jesus and the New Testament. Ultimately, Moses' aim was to encourage the people of God to faithful obedience. And it's the same for us today. It's to encourage us to be faithful and to obey God. And I hope as we work through this long, this difficult, this rarely read book, that we'll stick with it and we'll see God speaking to each one of us, calling us to be faithful and obedient.